control. I pray, mighty God, that you'll bless each and every participant and the presenters for today. Have thine own sweet way as we say thanks. In Jesus' holy name, amen. I will now hand over to our presenter for today. He is a very hardworking and focused young man who believes that all things are possible with God. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome Lamar Ejil, Regional Mathematics Coordinator, Region 5.
All right, good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you're all well, and I hope you're all hearing me as well as you can also see my screen. All right, so let me just go straight into the presentation. Thank you all for taking the time to be here with us today. Today's focus will be under the theme, Mathematics Leadership, Taking a Leap into the Virtual World. And our aim here today would be to support secondary principals in providing oversight and guidance in the development and implementation of mathematics action plans, right, in their respective schools. Now, it's very good for us to start by painting the context. And what it is that we understand today is that we are undergoing currently a pandemic. And with this pandemic, it would have altered for us the social order and our day-to-day activities as we go about living our lives. And we know today that with this pandemic and the change in the social order, it has also impacted education. As the image here depicts, we can see that our classrooms today are all empty, and we have now moved on to occupying the virtual space. These are indeed trying times, and it calls for great innovation, right, and strategic thinking. And one of the things that we have to consider today is that we are all called to be adaptable. So there is now a shift in how it is that we carry out the educational procedures. And with that, this shift requires us to be adaptable. In looking at the adaptive challenges, right, that exist, it requires us to really be quick with the learning process and to be innovative as we change and adjust our approaches to treat with the education process underneath this new era of content delivery. So right now, we're really being called to step outside of our comfort zone. We're called now to try new methods and to really pioneer the approach that will form the foundation for online teaching for the future generation to come. So as we are here today, the whole aim for this session is really to look closely at what it is that is required now of our principals at the secondary level in providing that type of support to the mathematics departments in delivering this to the students, the conceptual concepts to our students in a way, regardless of the modality that we're using. So one of the main themes that you'll be hearing throughout today's session is really the idea of accountability. And this is going to be echoed right through the entire presentation as we move from slide to slide. But let us start by looking first and foremost at what it is that, well, some of the areas that we had to be held accountable for before COVID. And the list would go on, but I've just picked on 3 areas for emphasis. So before COVID, we were very critical about our attendance, ensuring that students actually show up to the physical location and we can account for them. Because in accounting for our students' presence, it plays a role in our ability to deliver to them. In addition to that, there was the monitoring of the teaching and learning process, looking at the lesson plan process, looking at the teaching process, and looking also at how it is that students received and assimilated the information that was being shared. In addition to this, we also gave governance to the curriculum management structure and to also the interventions that were applied to treat with various gaps and learning needs observed by the school. Now, if we were to take a look at what is taking place or what it is that we are held accountable for or to during COVID, you'll realize that truly nothing has changed. We're still accountable to the students' attendance by means of their access to the delivery of content. There's still the close look at teaching and learning and the methodologies that are being applied across the modalities of delivery. And then the curriculum as it is still requires management. There's still the focus on looking at diagnostic assessments and using that data set to identify gaps and coining interventions to treat with students, regardless of the modality. The major point that is being made here and now is that all of the areas of accountability remain the same before COVID, during, and even after. So as we are here today, the big question is asked, how can we build a culture of accountability for the activities of the mathematics department? And we ask this question in relation to the fact that there has been so many changes in how we operate due to the structuring now of education, be it synchronous or asynchronously. So we want to answer this question as we go forward. And one of the more formal means of capturing our activities and capturing what it is that we do in accounting for the work of our teachers and our departments would be capturing it in what we call an action plan. Now, action planning is not new to any of us. It's something that we do. We have SIPs and we have departmental action plans that are coined on a yearly basis. And the areas of focus within these action plans, again, they're not new to us any at all. But what it is that is new is really the structures that exist, or the lack thereof, due to the fact that we are now operating under a new era. Before COVID, there was an established structure that would have been built upon after many years. And we have been working with that established structure of school operation. But with the impact that COVID has on education overall, that structure has really shifted. And we're now, as individual schools, trying to recreate a structure that eventually will become the structure for online teaching in years to come, all being well. So we know that within our action plan process, we pull together improvement goals and we have targets set. And with the virus that is upon us now, the structures that exist are by means of the goals that we want to achieve. They're basically the same goals, it's more of a different means of achieving such. Within our action plans, we know that it speaks to the specific actions or methods that a school will undertake to achieve the goals. We know that the action plan would speak to also the roles and responsibilities assigned to various members of staff. And the action plan would capture also the timeline for projects. But what is important now about the action plan process is that we want to ensure that what we put down as an action plan in treating with the teaching and learning process now is one that is fitting for the era that we are in. If we are to take up an action plan from last year, many of the elements might not be readily applicable to what is taking place now. More so because the action plan then was written under a different context. The context then was one that looked at having students in a physical space where they can interact with teachers. But now we are looking at interaction across a virtual means and looking both at the synchronous and the asynchronous approaches to delivery. So it means that how we corner action plans now will have to be based on what is taking place within the context of each school. So as we seek to address the matter of action planning throughout this presentation, we have two objectives in the form of a question. And we want to use these questions to form the foundation going forward for the remainder of the presentation. The first question being, how can we provide guidance to our teachers in developing an appropriate and targeted action plan? And again, this is from the perspective of a principal. And two, what are some suggested mechanisms or tools that can be used in monitoring the successful implementation of the activities and progress from the action plans? So we want to bear these two things in mind. How do we support in developing, and what do we do now in monitoring the implementation of the activities coming from the action plans, bearing in mind that we're in a new era. So whatever we're doing now, it behaves like trial and error with the aim of improving as we chart these new waters. Let us start by exploring a common cycle that we should know, and that would be the action plan process. Now, in looking at the action plan process and bringing your mind now to what is taking place in the country with the virus and how it is that we have to modify our approach to teaching and learning, we have to start the cycle with a needs assessment. We need to determine what are the areas of focus, what are the areas that we need to address, and from there we can use those needs identified to develop an action plan. Once we have developed our plan of action, then we implement the actions, we monitor the implementation of these actions, and we evaluate to determine success. And once we evaluate, we repeat the cycle and it goes on and on. What we have here is what we'll be focusing on as we go through the action plan process and as we focus on the role that the principal will be playing in supporting the math department in being prepared to engage the students irrespective of the modality. So the first thing on the table would be that of the needs assessment. Before we can begin to treat with a situation, we first must know and understand the needs. And so we require evidence. We require evidence to help us to decide how it is that we coin our targets and coin our activities to support the children. So we go with the statement here that says assessment informs action. So we start off with our needs assessment. And many of the elements that I'm discussing now and will be discussing throughout the presentation, they're not new concepts to us. What it is that is new is just the era that we're operating under. And we want to see how we can apply our known knowledge of assessment and action planning to the idea of the fact that the era has shifted and we must prepare ourselves for this new era of operation. And so there are some areas that we want to tap into to add to our needs assessment. In addition to the usual things that we focus on, what it is that we want to focus in now on students' access to the modalities. In order for a school to be successful in implementing any activity towards student success or growth by means of teaching and learning, we must first determine what is our access like for our students. And so we need to determine students' access to the modalities. Because of the shift in the era and the fact that some of these modalities are quite new to us as educators, we need to also look at teacher competency. And in looking at it, we want to ensure that teachers are adequately equipped to engage students across the various modalities. A part of our needs assessment would be the resources, those available and those needed. So based on how we're operating now, there's a greater need for technology and access to the internet. And so this should be factored in when we're conducting our needs assessment for the preparation of the action plans. And then a critical element to this would be the learning gap. Now, school would have closed March 2020, and when school closed, we would have applied, within the respective schools, you would have applied various methods to try to engage students. But in the rush of it, we know that there would have been the development of learning gaps due to the nature of engagement that would have been applied during that time. And so, as we try now to move forward to engage our students, we need to know what are the learning gaps And so that will inform how we coin delivery and how it is that we structure our curriculum for delivery. Once we have assessed and we are now ready to develop, we know that we should discuss the findings of the needs assessment conducted. And from those findings, we are now trying to discuss and outline targets. We have some objectives that we want to coin based on what we would have determined from our needs assessment, as well as a school where we want to go, and also in keeping with any other directive or guidance coming from the Ministry of Education. Once we discuss our targets and we establish them, we want to now establish our activities and define our roles and responsibilities for all those concerned. And with that done, we want to ensure that each activity is time-bounded, and so timelines should be established for the activities. And I must go over the fact that, again, the elements of action planning is not a new concept for us. However, what it is that we want to do is try and take these elements and apply it to what is taking place now. And so we look at a case. So it says here that the results of a needs assessment conducted by the senior management of MOE High School revealed the following. It revealed that 45% of the teaching staff are not familiar with the LMS. It also revealed that 60% of the students have direct access to the LMS. So it means that we have 40% of the students who don't have the means to access the LMS. And then the diagnostic results reveal major learning gaps. Now, we want to treat with this data or this information in the development phase of the action plan process. But let us first look at a critical question here to ask. How do we foster accountability during the development phase of the action plan? And so schools would, based on the data set and based on the direction that the school wants to go, you would also indicated or instructed the departments to also coin their action plans. Now, as they develop their action plans, as principals or school leaders, you want to be able to provide some amount of support to the development process of this action plan. And so we now talk about 3 essential factors that should be considered when working to account for the work done in developing the action plan. And so we have these 3 critical areas highlighted below: involvement, ownership, and clear definition of roles and responsibilities. And we'll discuss each and tie it back to the first case that we started to discuss earlier. So involvement. It says here that when individuals are involved in developing an action plan, the pool of solutions and perspectives increases, which results in a more comprehensive plan of action. It is very important that when you are planning or when action plans are being coined, you want to ensure that there's adequate involvement. So though as a principal, you may instruct the HOD to write an action plan, it is important that there's an understanding that the HOD should not sit down by his or herself and just put ideas on paper and present it as an action plan. Anything done in isolation like that cannot be effective. And so we must encourage proper involvement of the various stakeholders in the process. And so if an HOD is tasked to prepare an action plan based on stipulations given, then it is important that the HOD also understands that he or she should involve the members of the staff in the discussion and the coining of the activities. And so in involving more individuals in the process, it increases the pool of understanding and knowledge. And so the solutions that are provided would be based on the experience of those concerned and also the perspectives. And in doing so, what it is that is presented is more holistic in nature than if it was that the HOD sat by him or herself and designed the action plan. Now, what I have here would just be an idea of the nature of involvement, and I'm sure you could come up with many more individuals who you'd want to involve in each step of the process. But in looking at the case that we started with earlier, it says here again that the results of a needs assessment conducted by senior management of MOE High School revealed the following. And with the early finding, it said here that 45% of the teaching staff are not familiar with the LMS. So as an area that you want to address, within your action plan, you would have coined your target. But in coining the target to treat with this area, you want to ensure that you pull in a large pool of persons who can provide to the solution for the problem. And so the principal, the vice principal, you might have a few designates who you have selected based on their competence and experience. You might want to pull the HOD as well into the process. And so in doing so, you are now involving the key stakeholders and what is that is provided. There's an understanding for the context behind the action that is coined. And so what is prepared is in line now, or has a greater chance of being in line with providing a solution to the situation. Likewise, in looking at the fact that 60% of students have direct access to the LMS, now, it means that you want to account for the 60 as well as capture the remaining 40 who will not be able to access the LMS. And so you want the principal, even the VP designate based on experience, could be a senior teacher, the HOD, and the teachers. Who knows, the teachers might play a role as form teachers, and so you want their input in capturing the how it is that we engage our students, both the 60% as well as the 40%. And the same can also be said for the diagnostic results revealing major learning gaps. You want to pull in the HODs, the teachers, and you want to pull in your curriculum implementation team as well, as they play a role in the management of the curriculum. So the point that I'm making here is that once it is that you're ready to develop your plan, you want to look at, based on each element or focus area, you want to see who are the key stakeholders who should be involved in the planning process. And the same should be said for the department level plans. Who are the key stakeholders who should be involved in the process? The other element would be ownership. And as a factor, it says here, process owners are to be identified and their autonomy to operate should be made known to them. It is very important as school leaders that we don't get into the act of micromanaging every process, because it is, one, overwhelming to try to micromanage everything, and two, there is a mixture of experiences that exist within the school, and you want to give persons the autonomy to operate. So you would define their autonomy and then allow them time and space to go and really own the process. And having your process owner plays into the accountability process, in that you know who to call on based on the circumstance or situation. And so, even though you have a large pool of persons involved in the process, you may have a smaller set of persons who you consider to be your process owners or process managers. And so, looking at the case once more, where it said that 45% of the teaching staff are not familiar with the LMS, it could be that the principal designates the vice principal to take a leading role. And even so, you could have a senior teacher or an external individual who you might contract or utilize in ensuring that the teachers are trained and are able to utilize the LMS. And so once it is that you touch on anything regarding teacher competency with the LMS, you know exactly who to call on, you know who is the process owner, you know who it is that is accountable for this action. And the same can be said about the students who we need to capture regarding their access to the LMS and those who don't. And so you have somebody designated to take on this process, even though there are many persons involved in it. Looking closer also at the diagnostic results, It could be that you have the CIT leader playing a critical role in overseeing all of the curriculum and then the curriculum documents, and then the HODs per department would oversee their specific subject area. And so it is important, again, that while you involve a larger pool of stakeholders, you have to ensure that you define who it is that will own the process and who it is who you will know that is that individual who you hold accountable. The final element or the final factor that we highlighted would be clear definition of roles and responsibilities. So it says that it's important for the roles and responsibilities of each member or team to be clearly established. The goals of each should be established. The activities, those should be outlined. So each individual who's a part of the process understands what is required of them through their activities. And so going back to the situation here regarding the teacher's competency with the LMS, you want to ensure that it's established that we're focusing on the training of teachers in the use of the LMS. And then you want to go further to say you're looking at also the monitoring of teachers' progress in the use of the LMS. In looking at the students' access to the LMS, you want to account for students' access for the various modalities. So even though we have 40% of the students who cannot access the LMS, we want to also account for the 40%. And so if we're utilizing learning kits for the 40%, what mechanisms will be put in place to ensure that you can account for students' access and completion of work using the learning kits? And the same can be said for those children who will be accessing the broadcast programs. So even though that is there, how can you capture students' access to those platforms? And that is something that you might want to also account for. And then when it comes on to the learning gaps, you understand that, or there should be an understanding that there's a structured intervention to close the learning gap. And then there's monitoring, right? You want to monitor the effectiveness of the intervention that is being applied so that modifications can be made where necessary. Now, we have said much on the idea of assessment, assessing the needs, and then we have also talked about implementation. We've also talked about the development. But once it is that we have now developed our action plan, we need to now implement. But I don't want to keep or to separate implementation from monitoring. It is very important that as we implement or as we start to carry out the activities within the action plan, we want to also monitor each step of the way. And so the question is asked, what does monitoring look like? Now, it's important for us to know that we monitor on a broad scale. In terms of the school operation, we carry out monitoring on a larger scale. But let us focus closely at teaching and learning in terms of monitoring. And so when we say monitor, the principal or even the HOD for the department would conduct observations of lessons at regular intervals, bearing in mind that this is what we normally do when we had face-to-face engagement. There will also be the vetting of lesson plans to ensure that what it is that is captured in the plans will be sound, and the quality of the lesson. You're looking at the alignment of the objectives to the teaching and learning activities, and you're looking also at the alignment of the objectives and activities to the assessment. And so if that alignment is not so, then feedback would be given to the teachers, or at least feedback should be given to the teachers for improvement. And then there's also the quality assuring of student interventions. Whatever programs that are put together, the interventions, you want to ensure that they are quality assuring the process. And then there's also the management of the curriculum. These are all monitoring mechanisms played out by the HOD and the principal under normal face-to-face circumstances. However, let us be reminded that this is where we are now. The classrooms are empty. Teaching and learning is no longer taking place in this space. So we have to go back to the fact that we are now dealing with a shift and we need to be adaptable. And so in being adaptable, we need to take our usual monitoring mechanisms and now transfer that to our virtual or distance learning space. So we know that we have students who they can access the LMS. They have a device and they might have internet as well. And so they can directly access the LMS. But how do you continue to monitor now that there is a shift? So within the LMS, we're utilizing the LMS, what we normally do by visiting classes, so the HOD would visit the teacher's class, it is still important that the HOD and the principal is able to visit the Google Classroom or whatever modality you're using so that you can see the work that is being done and provide guidance and support. For some students, they don't have it so fortunately as those who could access the LMS. And so we have students who will have to utilize the broadcasted programs via radio or even via television. And so you wonder, how is it that we still continue to monitor? And then we have those students who would utilize just the learning kits and the textbooks because they don't have the use of the television or the radio or even the LMS platform to carry out the learning process for themselves. And so the question is asked, what do we do as a school to ensure that we account for our students? It is very important that despite the modality, we should be able to account for the students. And so with the LMS, in preparing, I'm sure that there might be a lesson plan structure or a lesson outline or something that is captured that would indicate the nature of work that will be done within this modality. Additionally, if we're looking at school level learning kits, you want to ensure that there is the monitoring of the work that is put in. So you want to quality assure. And when I say quality assure, I'm not saying that the principal must be the one to quality assure it, but someone with the defined role, such as the HOD, should be quality assuring these kits to ensure that it's conceptual and students can really learn from the kits. Let's explore a second case. Case 2 says here, Mr. Brown is a mathematics teacher at MOE High School. The school decided that teachers are to use Google Classroom, right, to engage all students. Now, what we have here, it says Mr. Brown, without any consultation, decided to share a Zoom link with his students. Of the 25 students in his class, only 5 can access the class via the link. Mr. Brown goes to the Google Classroom only to post assessment items based on what he taught during his Zoom sessions. So what we see here is a school that has established a system of engagement, that being the Google Classroom, and more so because of the fact that students will not be able to access live sessions such as the Zoom platform. But Mr. Brown here on his own has decided to go ahead and utilize Zoom because he cannot be bothered so much with trying to teach using the classroom, so the Google Classroom. So instead, he is using his Zoom account and engaging only the 5 students. And when he's through, he will post an activity in the classroom, which would not benefit 25 students because we have 20 of them who would not have been engaged in the content and the learning process and therefore would not be able to really respond effectively to the posting within the Google Classroom. Now, as it is, there are many other ways this could have played out, But the question I want to ask here is, what monitoring mechanisms would bring to light what Mr. Brown has been doing regarding the teaching of his students? Now, once it is that we would have established our means of monitoring what the teachers do, there are many access points for which we'll be able to treat with what Mr. Brown is doing, or to be made aware of what Mr. Brown is doing. The first access point would have been his lesson plan. Now, if his lesson plan spoke to the use of the Zoom, then based on the school's policy and decisions, the HOD, in looking at the plan, could then speak to Mr. Brown on the matter. But let us say that the plan did not speak to the use of the Zoom. Then the next point of contact would be just the regular checkups on the LMS, going into his classroom space. And in going inside that classroom space, you'd realize that there's nothing by the way of teaching and learning, but all that you see would be assessment items. Then that would spark a conversation with Mr. Brown. And with that conversation, it could come to light that he would be utilizing the Zoom. Additionally, you would have if it is that it did not come up in the conversation with Mr. Brown regarding the use of the Zoom, consulting also with the students and looking at the feedback would also give rise to the knowledge of what Mr. Brown is actually doing. And so it is extremely important that these monitoring mechanisms are put in place so that the teachers and the HOD as well as the principal will be able to go in and pick up on these anomalies and such, they can be treated thereafter. So here are some important questions to ask when planning for monitoring. And as the principal, I want to emphasize that it's not just the principal doing the monitoring, it is the principal creating a system of accountability that also ensures that the HOD is equipped to do the monitoring as well as a part of the defined role and responsibilities. And so we ask the question of who will monitor to check that the actions have been taken as specified in the plan? You want to ask the question of when. When will the monitoring take place? You want to ask the question of what. What strategies or methods will be used to monitor the progress of our students and the work of the teachers? And how? How will the outcomes be reported? And not only reported, but also recorded. So these are some critical questions that you want to ask once it is that you are going to really talk about monitoring what you have implemented from your action plans. So some examples for the individuals for the who part of it. So you would have your head of department playing a role in monitoring. You would have your senior teacher, you would have the CIT, which will be monitoring the curriculum. By means of when, it could be daily, it could be a day in the week, weekly, monthly, termly, quarterly. You decide the when based on the target. So monitoring could be specific to the target, because some targets require more time to achieve, and such you might want to try to monitor the target at the end of a month or a week. It all depends on the nature of your target. In looking at the strategies, you want to ensure that you also have a means of collecting the data. Now, everything that we do in education, it carries purpose, but we must be careful that after a while, in carrying the activity out over time, it becomes routine. And sometimes routine activities can really lose sight of its purpose. And so, yes, HODs are required to conduct lesson observations, but we have to remember, and we want to always bring to the forefront the purpose of doing so. So in conducting lesson observations, it's not just a school requirement or because it's written down as a job description, but you're actually conducting the lesson observations so that you can gain insight as to the performance of the teacher, so feedback can be given towards improvement, as well as you want to capture any common concern across the subjects, well, across the grades, and then from that, identify professional development needs for which later on they should be treated with. And so you want to ensure that there is an established system. So you want to have for yourself an observation form. And I know that many schools have observation forms already. But with the fact that we have shifted how we engage students, there is now a call to revisit the nature of your forms to see what modification needs to be done to the forms so that they can be utilized in now this virtual space. You want to also capture the grades and the progress of the students. And in doing so, you want to also ensure that there is heavy logging on behalf of the teachers and logging from the HOD as well. You want to record things. You want to record these things so that later on during the evaluation stage, you can draw on this material and utilize it as evidence as you prepare to coin and structure your support towards improvement. And so, because we're now in this virtual space, we want to also begin to utilize the virtual tools that exist. So we know that there is a reporting process, and when you report, you're reporting towards improvement. So normally we would have meetings in a common space, and from there the sharing takes place. And then there's also the addition of the paper trail. But what we want to also invest in that virtual paper trail as well. And so we might want to consider categorizing how we look at emailing. We want to also utilize, for example, the Google Drive. The Google Drive is a wonderful space where you can categorize and create folders, and you can share folders with who you please. And so this now operates as a means of continuing the reporting process, but doing so in a virtual space. And you can do so by utilizing the forms such as the Google Forms, Google Docs, and Google Sheets. And so let me quickly show you, not to try and teach you how to use these things, but more of showing you what it is that is there that you can pull on. And I hope that you can then pull on the strengths and the knowledge of the younger members of your staff or the more techno-savvy members of staff who can assist you in organizing the space as such. And so you can create Google Docs. So you can always capture the progress of the departments in keeping with the objectives of we are within their action plans. And so you can utilize a shared document, a shared form that can be completed by all your heads of departments. If not a form, if not a doc, you could also look at Google Sheets, where you can always go and add additional sheets. You could do a sheet per subject area, a sheet per department, right? You can rename the sheets and you can have them input the data. And if it is that you don't want everyone who has access to have access to edit everything, some persons can be added so that they can only view what is there. And then you can also consider the restricting of access to various sheets or the restricting of access to various cells so that the editing issue does not play out. Additionally, you could create Google Forms, and you can use the forms as a means of providing feedback. So you create a form and you can send that form to the various persons who need to fill it out, and they can complete the form. And in completing the form, that data can be compiled. I must note though that if you want someone to fill out a form, please don't share the form with them. You need to send the form to them. If you share the form with them, they are getting the privilege to edit the form. But if you send the form to them, all they can do is fill the form out and submit. So if you have encountered that challenge, this is how you would normally treat with it. Now, once participants have completed the form, you can go to responses and look at the collated data. Based on the nature of the questions that you have asked, it will be collated either as a pie chart or just have the qualitative responses collated for you to go and read. And if it is that you don't want to read it in this space, you can always go to the sheet icon and then transfer the responses to a Google Sheet, for which you can download and use as you please. And so the information will be transferred to a sheet that you could download and utilize in Excel as well. But all of this I'm sharing with you, not because I'm trying to teach you how to use it, but I'm sharing with you as a means of incorporating these tools into your approach to monitor. So as you require feedback from your staff and from your HODs and from the various members who play a critical role in monitoring or just providing feedback, you can utilize these forms as a means of capturing such feedback. And then we have the good old synchronous approach, utilizing Zoom, Google Meet, and all the other virtual platforms that allow for sessions like these. And so the custom is normally to have meetings in a physical space where everyone sits together, but we now need to open our mind to conducting these meetings virtually, being able to meet with persons in a virtual space. And even if you want persons to give a progress report in a meeting and they cannot attend, they could always go ahead and record themselves giving the feedback, and that can be played during the meeting. And questions can be noted and sent back to the individual who could not be in the meeting at that given time. And so it is for us to embrace the technology. Now, it says here as a quote that make a game plan and stick to it unless it doesn't work. And I want to remind you that the whole process that we're going through now is not one where we're existing in an established structure, but we are now trying to create a new structure. And if it is that as you work to really create the structure now, and if things are working, you continue, but where things don't work, then it's time for us to go back to the drawing board. And so the final phase of the cycle is evaluation itself. Program evaluations are critical for informing the structural changes that need to be made. Now, when we hear evaluation, or more so, when teachers hear evaluation, what they hear is appraisal. And they hear this because of how the two words are utilized. Most times evaluations are done, and you hear the word, you say, oh, I'm evaluating you, I'm appraising you. And so the attitude and the thinking behind evaluation is more of a grade on you, the individual, and not a grade on the process that we want to refine. And so we want to be careful to not really cement this type of thinking in the minds of our teachers. We want to ensure that we understand and we share that evaluation itself, in its true sense, we are trying to evaluate a program, and the teacher is just one part of that program and process. And so in carrying out our evaluations, we are trying to see what works, what doesn't work, and then from there, try to now adjust the approach so that we can improve in all systems. And that is the critical point for us now. So as you implement and monitor, we have to also evaluate. You can evaluate the entire process. You can evaluate components of the process based on timelines. And so we take to the final case so far. This case says the principal of MOE High School at the end of the first term decided to evaluate all systems of operation. And she wants to also include, and this system of operation includes the teaching and learning process. So two of the critical feedback points for the mathematics department were, one, the students were not able to answer most of the assessment items from the school designed learning kits. The second point was that it was noted that the feedback students gave on learning kits returned were not factored into the learning kit that followed. What is taking place here is that having evaluated the structures that were in place for what is taking place now within the education system, at the end of the first term, the principal conducted an evaluation of all systems. And the feedback to the math department was that based on all that you're doing, two key things came out. One, the students are not able to respond to the assessment items in the kits. Something is wrong. Something needs to be done. Additionally, we realize that you're not providing feedback to the students or you're not addressing their concerns coming from the feedback given from one kit, but the kits basically are being done in isolation. So those are two areas that need to be addressed. But I hope you see what's happening here. The cycle is starting over. So you have evaluated, but you want to now treat with the situation. You have to reassess. Reassess what you're doing, and having reassessed what you're doing, then the next thing to do would be to readjust your activities, re-implement, monitor once more, and evaluate to see if the progress that you want to see is being made. And that is the whole idea. So there has to be the empowerment of the department in carrying this out. But here's a big question. What mechanisms would have been used to capture this data? How is it that this was captured in the first place? The point that is being made here is documentation is key. It is critical at this point in time that we document everything. So as you try to monitor what the work of the departments, and as you establish all that you want to do, we have to document. So when you conduct the lesson observations, we need to document. When lesson evaluations, we document the logs, the review of student work, we document everything, and we document it for the purpose of evaluating and making adjustments to the system. Because I remind you that before COVID, we had established systems working in. During COVID, what is taking place here is that we are trying to create new systems. So as each school works to refine the process with repeated evaluation over time, there'll be a general understanding of what needs to be done so that online education, distance learning becomes a reality and becomes more feasible than it currently is. And so we take you back to the critical points that we spoke on earlier. And I'm deliberately reminding you of these things. We are currently undergoing a shift. And with this shift, we need to be able to adapt to the challenges. And in adapting, we must be able to learn quickly and to be innovative in our approach. And being innovative means that it's going to also be uncomfortable. Of the critical points that we discussed today, a key element for the principal would have been accountability. And in accounting for the work from the establishment of the action plan to the implementation and evaluation would have been the monitoring every step of the way. Putting systems in place that would allow for the monitoring. We don't want a situation to go by where the work was done in case 2 like Mr. Brown, who would have been doing his own thing. If systems of monitoring was not in place, then he would have gone by, as in case 2 presented earlier, and taught using the Zoom platform and only engaged 5 of his students. If systems are not in place, we cannot do the checks and balances. We cannot begin to determine what needs to be adjusted. And we want to evaluate. We want to separate the thinking that evaluation is only appraisal. You're evaluating the program and you want to see what adjustments need to be made. But what is going to fuel that evaluation is the records. What it is that you have captured, what you have documented, the analysis of what you have documented will play a critical role in your evaluation. And as of such, it will also play a critical role in how you go forward to now reassess and adjust your activities so you can continue to re-implement. So principals, all of what was said today was done so that guidance can be given to how you look at the work that your department should be doing. And what is critical now is that we have some sessions coming up also for our HODs, our mathematics HODs. And so I'm trying to now reach out to you so that you can encourage and allow your HODs to attend our sessions, your math HODs, because we also want to engage them to see how it is that we can support them in ensuring that they are also ready to take on the leadership necessary for mathematics during this time underneath all of the various modalities. And so we have for you here also a list of contact numbers and email addresses for the 7 regional mathematics coordinators. So based on your region, you will have the email address and contact number. Please feel free to contact them for your respective regional math coordinator for support. They can advise, consult with them, and from there, you can collaborate on activities and so on and such forth. So please feel free to take these numbers and contacts down so that you can have them to contact and reach out to when a need arises. And so this now takes you to the end of the session. I hope that what was shared with you was insightful and you can at least take 1 or 2 elements, if not all, and apply in your school. We have here for you a link to our evaluation form and a QR code so you can scan and go straight to our form. The form link has also been placed in the chat for you by Mrs. Johnson-Borrell, so you can also use that link. So we value your feedback, so please do fill out the form, and I hope that you enjoyed today's session. Thank you.
Thank you to our presenter, Mr. Edgil, and thank you to all our principals for taking the time out to join us in our session today. We do hope that the session was beneficial to you as you used and you would utilize what you would have learned today to assist in your professional growth. Have a wonderful evening all.
All right. And if it is that there are any questions at this time, for persons who are still here, you can feel free to ask those questions. Hello.